Hi, everyone. I'm Sally Allen with the Livermore Lab Foundation. Welcome to the fourth and final installment of the Foundation's Summer Speaker Series, which has been featuring past and present leaders from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. As I mentioned, I'm Sally Allen, the Executive Director of the Livermore Lab Foundation. We're an independent nonprofit organization and philanthropic partner to Livermore Lab, dedicated to advancing science and inspiring future scientists and engineers. This is a milestone year for Livermore Lab as it celebrates 70 years of science and technology on a mission. And today we are pleased to bring you global security in the 21st century with our featured speaker, Dr. Huban Gowadia. I'd like to ask if everyone could please remain muted during today's talk. You can use the chat function in Zoom to ask any questions that you may have, and we hope to have some time at the end to address them. And our entire speaker series will be available on our YouTube channel in just a few weeks, so we will be recording today's session. We've asked a very special guest to introduce Huban Gowadia today. Ambassador Ron Layman is the counselor to the director of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. He has held a number of positions in both the U.S. Department of Defense as well as the State Department. And for many years, he also ran Livermore Lab's Center for Global Security Research. And now here's Ron with a few words about today's talk.
Welcome to the Livermore Lab Foundation Speaker Series. I'm Ron Layman, counselor to the director of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Over the years, I've worn many hats at the lab, with the Defense Department and the State Department and with other departments and agencies, and with international organizations and even in the military. I was once on the legislative staff of a Senate committee. What my experience has taught me is that applying science to help solve challenging problems requires breadth of knowledge as well as depth of knowledge. Dr. Huban Gowadia, your speaker today, and my friend and colleague, clearly has vast amounts of both types of knowledge. Sally will introduce Dr. Gowadia and highlight Huban's credentials, so I just want to offer some thoughts on why her work is so important. Today, many revolutions are taking place in science, for example, in biology, materials, sensors, and computations. Much of the resulting technology is advancing rapidly and spreading around the world. Working together within our own country and with other nations, we can gain great benefit from this rapidly changing technology. Unfortunately, most technology is inherently dual use in the sense that it can also be used for military purposes or in other ways that can be harmful. In the closed societies of authoritarian regimes, the industrial footprints and process signatures of many of these technologies, including some related to weapons of mass destruction, are very difficult to detect. And detection is not the same thing as identification or attribution. We face great difficulty being certain that we will actually know what we need to know when we need to know it. That is the challenge that Huban and her team face. It's an interesting story. Sally, over to you.
And now for our featured speaker. As the Principal Associate Director for Global Security, Dr. Gowadia is responsible for building and executing programs focused on intelligence, non-proliferation, counter-proliferation, and counterterrorism and incident response across the spectrum of chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive threats. She is also responsible for programs in energy technologies, infrastructure protection, and cyber and space security. Dr. Gowadia joined Livermore Lab in May of 2018 as the National Ignition Facility and Photon Science Deputy Principal Associate Director for Programs. She has more than 20 years of experience supporting national security and has served at the highest levels of government, including multiple organizations in the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Aviation Administration. In her previous role as acting administrator at the Transportation Security Administration, she led a workforce of more than 60,000 employees charged with protecting our critical transportation systems and the traveling public. Prior to her service at TSA, she also served as the presidentially appointed director of the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office at the Department of Homeland Security. I'm really honored and pleased today to welcome Dr. Huban Gowadia.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you for that very kind introduction, and also to Ron for perfectly teeing up my talk today. If as you heard Sally talk about what, Patrice, would you start sharing my slides, please? Let's wait till they come up. Sally, would you give us a confirmation you're seeing them good?
Yes, it looks like they're showing up. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Well, in that case, so let's dive into the talk. And what you heard Sally talk about really is quite conceivably the funnest job at the laboratory, because of the span and the scope my team and I get to tackle every day. And the challenge, of course, is the fact that the global security environment is complex and dynamic. You heard Ron talk about it rather well in framing it, but we have to deal with two nation states now who are near peer adversaries. There's Russia, of course, and there's China, and the space that we have to contend with their efforts and in the global security commons is across missiles, drones, satellites, space, cyber. All of these domains, we have to think through all the ways this is, as Ron mentioned, on one hand, helpful to us, space and cyber for certain, but then on the flip side, how could it be a dual use effort? Now, we know we also have to deal with nation states like Iran and North Korea, potentially another state that we haven't been paying attention to. But while we're dealing with the nation state threat, we can't forget about the terrorist threat as well. So all of these movements combined with, next chart please, Trace, the fact that natural and human-driven forces are shaping our environment makes it so that we in global security don't see one boring day or one slow day. Really, the global stability depends on the health of the planet and its inhabitants. So let's think of a few things that are changing and how we at the laboratory might be able to help. You all know well that our infrastructure, our national infrastructure, is aging and fragile. We've had grid disruptions. We've had climate change affecting how we deliver power and energy. So we have to rethink how we do our infrastructure for energy delivery. And so there is this notion of cyber physical systems. Well, if we had a chance to put in a new internet today, we probably would think through the cybersecurity ramifications right out of that. Well, we're building new grids, we're building new renewable sources of energy. We should think through how we can work in the cyber elements into these systems right off the bat. We've all lived through the COVID pandemic. I don't need to tell you how much naturally emerging diseases are affecting our lives, affecting our national security, affecting our economy. And there are naturally occurring diseases, but then there is the flip side, right? As Ron mentioned, the bioengineered pathogens, those can be certainly very impactful on the battlefield. We need to think through that here at our laboratory. California has experienced the most incredible fires. We have one going on right now that saddens me every day as it closes in on the wonderful Mariposa Grove. So we do have these frequent extreme weather events. What can we do at the laboratory to help with the logistics and operational challenges that inevitably accompany these events? And then there's this notion of what climate change is doing to sea ice, right? As it melts, habitats are changing. Not only does this mean that there is this notion that you now have year-round access to Arctic waters, that's a good thing in some instances, but also strategically now Russia has access to ports, for example, that it did not have on a year-round basis, right? Warm water ports. So what does that mean for our strategic advantage? What does that mean also as the sea ice melts for all the methane that is released up into the climate, into the atmosphere? So we have climate change impacts of the sea ice melting as well. And then of course, there is this notion of resource scarcity driving migration. Some believe that the Syrian migration might have happened, the mass migration into Europe might have happened regardless of the civil war on account of a long and enduring drought. We will see more and more migratory patterns for coming up in the future on account of climate change and what it's doing to our ability to have water and food. So we need to think through some of those impacts. And here at our national laboratory, here at Livermore National Laboratory, we have the ability to work across the science community, where one side of us thinks through the threat. We think through the national security impacts. We work through, we develop deep understandings of these threats. And then we take the science and the research we do here and apply it to the mission sets. But interestingly, we can't do that if we don't lean on our international S&T community. We can ask them our key questions, share with them our key needs, and working across the diaspora of academia, industry, other national laboratories, philanthropy, etc., we can leverage their innovation cycles to bring deep science back into the national security community, apply multidisciplinary team science, and develop the right tools and expertise to develop solutions, deliver solutions for the threats that we just talked about. So here in global security, as I mentioned earlier, never, next chart please, Trace, never a boring moment. We have to deliver these innovative solutions to global security challenges, but we must do that in threat-relevant timeframes. So within our directorate, we think through things in fundamentally 4 effort focuses. First is anticipating the threat. It is important that we understand and appreciate where and how the threat will manifest. But once we have that, we need to know how we can reduce and mitigate the impacts of that threat. Always, we are seeking to create strategic advantage for our nation, making sure that we do not lose our primacy on the world stage. And of course, you heard Sally talk about bringing S&T on a mission. Supporting operations is fundamentally the heart of what we do. So next chart, please, Trees. Let's talk about anticipating the threat, right? Here we bring the full range of the laboratory's analytical and technical skill sets to bear upon the most pressing intelligence challenges of our time. Here at the laboratory, we are home to the storied Z program, used to be known as Z Division. It was established in 1965. It is the longest, most enduring program within the Global Security Directorate at this point. And through this arm, which supports the intelligence community, we are able to inform national policy formation. As you all know, we are a federally funded research and development center, so it is our responsibility to provide objective advice, help guide and shape this national policy. We inform programs, whether right here at the laboratory for program development, R&D, or externally within the intelligence community, helping them shape programs of the future. Now, one thing is really interesting. We're at a point in time when the threats of the future are so largely driven by science, right? So to be at a national laboratory where we can do intelligence-informed S&T and S&T-informed intelligence in the same area, in the 1 square mile right here, is very powerful. We bring this to bear to support operations as well, real-time operations. So you see that we can do this integrated analytical assessments, whether it's for WMD threats that are like nuclear devices, fuel cycles, or foreign weapons effort. We can support non-proliferation and arms control regimes. How do we enable treaties? How do we give them the right technical information to do the right export controls on dual-use technologies that Ron mentioned earlier? All of that work happens right here in our Z program. And then, as I mentioned, addressing these S&T-driven threats and the technical competition that is underway globally. We are definitely, in fact, we've just stood up a new division to look at science and technology assessments. What are the threats of the future? How do we get prepared? And certainly when it comes to space and cybersecurity, we'll be talking a lot more about that shortly. So I'll save that for that time. Next chart, please, Trace. So when it comes to reducing and mitigating the threat, we sort of take this framework from the nuclear threat, but it is truly applicable regardless of chem, bio, rad, nuclear explosives. It is important first that you understand the motivation, right? Well, why would somebody be wanting to do it? And then what would be their footprints and fingerprints of their planning efforts? Are they attempting to acquire materials? What technologies are they trying to acquire? And how could we stay ahead of that? Are they developing the capability to weaponize, produce the weapon, deliver it to target? Again, what can we do? What signals and signatures are available for us to observe and to monitor? And then, God forbid, should they actually use the weapon, are we able to conduct post-event actions? What can we support? Can we attribute it back? Can we do the forensics to determine who did detonate the weapon or cause the attack? And so this four-pronged approach, that the non-proliferation, keeping the weapons knowledge, the materials, the technologies from being proliferated, the notion of countering terrorism and the proliferation, forensics and attribution, from materials all the way to devices. And then again, as I said, God forbid, should we need to step in and help with the incident response. You see a lot of government symbols and agency logos up on this chart. Is there a reason for that? The efforts are distributed across multiple departments and agencies, and our role as an FFRDC is to help pull it all together and make sure that the United States government is informed and appreciates all the efforts across the board. So next chart, please. Let's dive into the nuclear effort, right? Reducing the nuclear threat. First, as materials move, nuclear materials move, there are some legitimate movements and then some not so. And so it is important for us to be able to detect this earlier and far more accurately than we used to be able to do. Identifying the threats, developing the tools to enable this early detection of proliferation is something we at the lab have done for many, many years. What you see in the image on the lower left is these yellow stanchions. These are radiation portal monitors. They are deployed at all our sea and land ports of entry and some even at our airports of entry. So all cargo, all goods that come into this country are scanned for nuclear and radiological threats. Well, it used to be that these being just detectors, they're not identifiers, just detectors, a lot of naturally occurring radioactive material was setting them off. Blueberries, granite, all manner of, there was a point in time where there was doggy bowls, all kinds of things can set this off if they have radioactive material in them. It was wasting the time of a lot of Customs and Border Protection officers because really there was nothing nefarious there. It was pretty benign. Well, we worked using our capabilities here in machine learning, artificial intelligence, our high-performance computing capabilities. We've developed a means by which an algorithm can reduce this notion of of nuisance alarms, right? And down by 67%. So just imagine how much time this saves for our Customs and Border Protection folk who can now go out and do so many other important national security tasks rather than resolving nuclear alarms for just benign materials. But if people are trying to transport material, those who might be trying to build a program are trying to conceal their testing from us. So low yield nuclear explosion monitoring is becoming more and more of a challenge, and we need local monitoring data today, something between up to about 100 meters between the event and the sensor. Well, we can't always have that. And so it is important for us to be able to determine means to do this from afar. So we are working across the NNSA enterprise to develop test beds at our Nevada test site facility to demonstrate new predictive capabilities to detect and identify and even locate and characterize these underground nuclear explosions. That's a pretty exciting project, and we've been doing this for quite a while. I'm really looking forward to the data that come out of the tests and see where we can push that. Now, another thing we need to do is to improve our ability to predict nuclear cloud rise and fallout models, right? This helps make sure that we have the right response. Well, long ago, actually it was all the way back in 1953, Grable, 15 kiloton air shot about 500 feet above ground. You see it in the lower right-hand image that's moving. And that's That's the video we had. Well, we weren't able to predict and model that very, very accurately in the past. But today, based on all our science and our capabilities here, you see we are actually able to model from first principles nuclear cloud rise and fallout pretty accurately. So next chart, please. Let's talk about the biological threats. The architecture for a long time in dealing with biological threats has been this notion of very static, very pathogen-centric defense. Well, our approach in the future needs to be far more dynamic and rather human-centric. So we are aiming for a situation in which maybe we can have a pan-virus vaccination, for example, vaccine. So let's think about what we just went through, COVID-19. Well, we here at the laboratory, we were able to use some AI-driven platforms to get antibody designs in days versus months and years. You know, it usually takes a long time to develop antidotes and antibodies for these viruses. But working over the Christmas break, our folk here, 2 weeks, ran millions of runs on our high-performance computers. They were able to target a site that was predicted and rapidly produced neutralizing antibodies. And so we were able to deliver a potential therapeutic for the Omicron variant in 2 weeks. So that's pretty special. And we will continue to use that platform to work on other viruses and look for therapeutics for a wide range of diseases. Now, let's think about another application of our ability to appreciate and understand the human body. You know, when in the warfighting community, especially in the special ops community, certain sets of warfighters, certain sets of candidates seem to come through the system much better than others. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we were able to correlate the phenotypes, externally observable physical, behavioral, and cognitive features and traits of these very successful specialized operators with measurable elements of their individual biology? This helps us understand and maybe even ultimately anticipate their performance in various situations. More and more, we're hearing from the military that they want to be able to leave the warfighter in the fight and not pull them out. So if that's help them find ways to heal, help them find ways to protect themselves, keeping in mind that information at the individual level will help us do that, help us train, help the development of this soldier or sailor. It's really important. We better appreciate how the body responds. That's work we're doing right here at the laboratory. And then, of course, as I said, God forbid there should be some sort of release, say in a metro system, in a transit system. Well, we've been working with the metro system in New York to see how these particles move all through the system based on a very interesting particle that we invented here at the laboratory. It's called DNA tracks. It's a sugar particle tagged with a DNA barcode. So you can release these particles in multiple areas in the system and detect them in other areas and know how the various releases have moved around the system. We've been doing this work with them for almost a decade, I want to say. And very recently, in the fall of 2021, we did the most recent round, a very large experiment. So we've done this at the Pentagon. We're learning a lot of things about how biological threats could move through systems. Next chart, please. When it comes to chemical warfare agents, forever and a day, nerve agent antidotes did not have the ability to penetrate or to cross the blood-brain barrier. And so we had peripheral nervous system antidotes that targeted the peripheral nervous system. We're working right here at Livermore. We have been investigating the effectiveness of a candidate antidote that actually does cross the blood-brain barrier. We're looking at it for its effectiveness against VX and newer agents like Novichok's. So this is quite a breakthrough. It could set that path forward for protecting victims of bioterrorism, chemical weapons, any number of things. But there are some chemicals that chlorine, for example, if you drop it, it doesn't really leave very much of a footprint because it just dissipates pretty quickly. And so there's no evidence left behind for us to chase on. Well, we had an idea. Are there biomarkers in vegetation? Can we look for them to confirm the exposure to chlorine gas? Sure enough, it happens in grasses. And so we've been working on that for a while. But the nation is also dealing with a human health risk on opioid exposure. So can we jump in the fray and help based on all the experience we've had with chemical warfare agents? Fentanyls, are actually a specialized group of warfare, chemical warfare agent. These are incapacitating agents. So bringing all that knowledge to bear, we have some pretty unique capabilities in infrastructure here also, like a bioaccelerator, mass spectrometer. And we've been working on the human brain on a chip. And so our experience in sequencing all the stuff, putting it together, we're looking at means, and we have some thoughts on how we might be able to help reverse the effects of opioid exposure. And all of this work happens in the most incredible laboratory for a forensic science center here, which has maintained its OPCW certification with a passing A grade in the most recent proficiency test. Quite a remarkable team you see down there, right? Next chart, please. Let's go to our next pillar, which is creating strategic advantage, right? So wars today, they are being fought across multiple domains, anything from conventional weapons to cyber, from terrestrial to space. And so as we endeavor to enable our nation's integrated deterrence posture, we must also continue to develop strong capabilities in these individual domains. And today I'd like to highlight a couple of things we've been doing in space and cyber to that end. Arguably, the domain that probably bears most directly on creating strategic advantage is space. It is already a warfighting domain, right? So here we integrate our intelligence program with our core S&T capabilities, especially our long-standing scientific contributions in astrophysics, cosmochemistry, optical science, all to respond to emerging security threats. So let's think about the first element, analyzing the conduct of new space missions. A good example of that is our support to NASA's mission to explore the asteroid Psyche. It was originally scheduled to launch in 2022 with arrival at Psyche in 2026. It's been delayed a bit, but we're not losing hope. This is a really interesting application of work we did right here, our terrestrial work on radiation detection technology, a gamma ray spectrometer that we developed for use in nuclear forensics missions. We then adapted it to analyze extraterrestrial material. And once this instrument has flown, we've gathered all these data, we will bring it back and incorporate what we know to improve our ability to detect things right here on Earth. So you see this lovely cycle of science informing the national security mission and the national security mission providing tools that can then help with the science. A great example of the chart I showed you earlier on. Now, it is also important that we leverage one of our critical areas of expertise, optical payloads, right? So we have incredible strength here in optics design and fabrication. And what you see here on your lower left is a small CubeSat. It's called GeoStare-2, a very reliable spacecraft built by our partner Tyvak. It's about the size of a shoebox. And it carries on it a very powerful imaging capability that we developed right here on Livermore. It's a monolith telescope. These small telescopes can be used to study Earth and space and can also support satellite navigation. And when it flew over our lab, it took a selfie. There you go. You can see it there. But we also apply our expertise in math and statistical methods for space domain awareness. So it is important that as the United States builds out a custody layer, this is whereby we maintain all weather custody of all identified time critical targets, we here at the laboratory, we are gaining greater and greater trust in this community, and they are asking our space security and science program to contribute more and more leadership in that realm. So wonderful place to come contribute if you're interested in space. Next chart, please, Teresa. And then there's the other side, is the cyber side that I mentioned from our early chart. It's the cyber domain. Now, what you see here is the NIST structure for how one thinks through cyber threats: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And we at the laboratory added endure. And I'll explain that in a second, but keep that framework in mind, because I think the days when one can just throw up a moat, throw up a firewall, and expect the adversary to stay out are long gone. Well, what about the adversary? There is the tier 1 adversary, tier 2 adversary, those who can use vulnerabilities that already exist in our system. There's the 3 and 4 who can discover vulnerabilities. And then, of course, there are the nation state actors who can actually create vulnerabilities. So next chart, please, Trace. Yes, it's industry that really is the target of 1 and 2. And this is where cyber hygiene, not leaving your password attached to the bottom of your keyboard, things like that can help us a lot manage the tier 1 and 2 adversaries. We are partnering with utilities and industry to help them with those who can discover the vulnerabilities in cyber architectures. But ultimately, our focus really is on these nation state actors, those who can create vulnerabilities. They demand our best national resources, and where Livermore focuses. Next chart, please. So how do we approach our contributions to cybersecurity? Well, we think about it in a holistic, layered defense approach. First and foremost, we must understand the systems. To this, we bring our capabilities to do network mapping, both in the IT and OT systems. We have abilities to do continuous network and device monitoring. We need to think through potential pathways for attacks. Can we break that apart? What systems are most vulnerable? Where are the critical nodes? Can we start thinking through prioritizing them and adding capabilities to defend them? Of course, we must do everything we can to deny the adversary access to our systems. We must make it harder and harder for them to compromise our work. Software and firmware assurance, that is important for us to have. System criticality analysis, again, where do we really want to push back on them? We may not be able to be everywhere all at once. But once they do get in, we need to detect quickly and respond as fast as possible. Here we can rely a little bit on our intelligence community. The intelligence-informed advanced threat detection is a key part of what we bring to bear. And of course, automated responses. Wouldn't be nice if we didn't have to wait for a human in the loop. We'll talk through that in a little bit. And then, of course, as I said before, we should expect to be compromised. We should build systems that are resilient and able to operate through continue operations through the compromise. So here at our laboratory, we bring some very, very interesting skills and tools to bear on this mission set. First, network characterization and cyber-physical modeling. It's so important to know what is out there, mapping to see what we have in the system. Our special sauce is pulling the regular mapping into a model, combining it with models of the physical processes so that we can then explore cyber attacks on physical systems in great detail. Today, software is put together, third-party software in particular, is put together using different libraries, different contributors, etc. So to ensure that the final product has a level of software assurance is critical. Now here at the laboratory, we can do this at scale with minimum human in the loop engagement. Our strength is that automation. And this is especially necessary for military systems and homeland security applications, as you can imagine. And then finally, there's the approach, a very interesting approach that we have been taking with an industry partner. It's collaborative autonomy. Think about this. Today, our energy grid, there are particular nodes. If you compromise the node, you could bring down the grid. You could bring down the distribution of energy. wouldn't it be interesting if all the edge devices that connected up to this energy source maintained some level of decision making on what happens in the grid? Wouldn't it be interesting to be able to leverage the little computational power on these edge devices so they can check each other's homework? That means if you actually want to compromise the grid, you have to compromise at least 50% of those edge devices. And not only that, they're all different edge devices. So you have to compromise different systems. So this certainly complicates the attacker's calculus. And that's sort of where we're headed in the future with cyber. Next chart, please. But another piece of strategic advantage is actually appreciating and understanding, mitigating and managing the effects of climate change, right, on this infrastructure that ultimately bears on our national security. Now, we here at the laboratory, we feel we have something rather important to contribute on this front, not just because we understand the cyber physical systems so well, but because we have also developed, we also have a long history and pedigree in climate science. Now let's look at the map, the graph on the left. To keep global warming below the Paris target, the 2 degrees C target, there's 3 things we have to do. First, we have to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Secondly, we have to build modern infrastructure to facilitate the transition to cleaner sources of energy. And finally, all this carbon dioxide that's up in the atmosphere, we have to find a means to pull it down. And here at our laboratory, we're focusing our attention on all 3 elements. There's the clean energy technologies bit, where today, even if we can generate a lot of energy from wind and solar power and wind power, well, we don't have the means to store it sufficiently, right? So understanding materials in harsh conditions, something that was absolutely necessary for our core nuclear weapons work, we are now able to bring to bear, along with the attendant tool sets, on this notion of the challenging performance requirements of next generation batteries. So we're looking at battery architectures, the critical materials that will be necessary to develop these batteries of the future. We bring to bear a very interesting integrated approach that combines materials, advanced manufacturing, testing capabilities, high-performance computing capabilities, all to accelerate innovation, ultimately with the goal of making it so that we can do all of this at scale, make it economic to capture carbon, to store this energy, making it so that we can actually have a wider deployment of capabilities to manage the global warming situation. Now, we talked a little bit about energy infrastructure from the cyber perspective, but today, renewable generation is just not dispatchable. We need to be able to figure out how to control the load on the grid, appreciate and understand how power flows both ways. Can we understand, control the flow of the electrons? Infrastructures are also so interdependent. Can we manage the interdependencies? So all our efforts in risk analysis and optimization, our ability to do advanced modeling and simulation of infrastructure, our test beds that bring cyber physical infrastructure together, our injects from intelligence, we put all of this to bear on understanding what is going to be necessary for the energy infrastructure of the future. And right here at our laboratory, out in the Tracy Hills, we are going to have a little pilot, which is really interesting, because that site right now only has one source of energy. Well, if we set up this little microgrid, we're going to be able to use solar and wind power to augment the energy resources and sources of energy at the site, but also because it's separated and we can test in interesting attacks on that grid from a cyber perspective, from a physical perspective, etc. So I'm really looking forward to that coming down in the future. But as I said before, we still have to capture and repurpose the carbon dioxide that's already out there in the air. So a prime example of our negative emissions strategy is the work we have been doing on sequestering carbon, using biofuels, for instance, looking at sawgrasses that can pull the carbon dioxide out of the air and bury it deep in ground through their root systems. We are also demonstrating the potential for carbon sequestration in the subsurface. Now, going back to our history again with the underground nuclear test program, we appreciate and understand how the subsurface works. So today we apply that knowledge to modeling this reservoir and appreciating the effects of injecting carbon dioxide down into the porous subsurface layers. And then, of course, wouldn't it be neat if we could replace hydrocarbons that are presently used, for example, in carpets today, or carbon nanotubes? What about all the carbon we've captured? Can we repurpose it and make products today, in the future, that today use hydrocarbons? So that's some of the work we're doing on managing and mitigating the effects of climate change. Next slide, please. But going back to this is the part that rings so true for me, because as you see over my right shoulder, the operator and their thoughts are never far from my mind. It is important that we support them, we help them with their training, we help them with materials that can protect them, and then as they go about conducting special missions, we have to find a way to give them capabilities to do that. So, realistic training. It is really, really hard to generate the right response in training when you're only working with surrogate materials. But today there have been so many advances in the gaming world and in the movie industry. We can bring all of that combined with our knowledge and understanding of nuclear materials to build very realistic training capabilities for our nuclear response, emergency response teams. Tarantula, that's tactical augmented reality applications for NEST. Whew, quite an acronym. But this allows us to give them some really interesting an augmented reality coupled in with a retract person's voice to help guide them through clearing spaces, for example. JCATS for DoD, this is something we've been doing for a long while. We have a conflict simulation laboratory here at the on site, and it helps warfighters train across the multi-domain deterrence, helps them think through new realms of warfare. It's essentially the Swiss Army knife of tactical simulations, but it enables their training, and we've had a lot of partnership from across the world. Militaries from across the world come work with us on that. Our Forensic Science Center, they support the Department of State, who help others across the world. For instance, the work we did with Iraq's emergency responders in 2013, we helped them with their threat identification, emergency response, evidence collection, forensic sample analysis, helped them set up their laboratory, all through the auspices of the Department of State. Now, you heard me speak earlier about this vision for never pulling a warfighter off the field, right? Just having them keep going. Well, that means we have to give them stuff to protect them, for example, from chemical warfare agents. Well, we're looking at a very interesting material called second skin, which has it's very lightweight material. It has pores large enough that will allow your sweat and water vapor to escape, but holes small enough to block large chemical warfare agent molecules from coming in, and better yet, might even give an indication to the warfighter that he or she has been exposed. So think about this, how it might help DoD, but also think how much could this help our firefighters if they were to be able to wear lightweight materials going into a fight, right? So this is pretty exciting stuff. And then leveraging all our expertise in explosives detection and AI and swarm theory, etc. We're looking at drones and sensors for clearing minefields, for example. Imagine that an amphibious assault, you wouldn't want to just charge up on the beach. You'd want to make sure the beach was clear of mines. Well, you're looking at that. In fact, we demonstrated our capabilities at a recent NATO exercise, and now all our NATO partners are really interested in getting their hands on this capability. Next chart, please, Trace. I've covered a lot of this through the deck, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the reach-back capabilities we have here through our NARAC, our National Atmospheric Release Advisory Center. These are as missions get more and more technical, men and women on the front line, they really benefit from having access to scientists and engineers here, the ability to call home for technical support. We've been doing this for a very long time. At NARAC on the nuclear front, we've been monitoring the North Korean tests since 2006. We have the ability to look at releases of radioactive materials, data that comes through on the IAES sensors scattered all across Europe, for example. We can bring those data in and help trace it back to where the source might, where the release might have happened. We've supported Fukushima through this center, et cetera, and we continue to develop new tools that will enable our NARAC folk to provide much more timely, much faster, much more specific assistance. As you can imagine, they were called in to support the war in Ukraine as well. Now, our Forensic Science Center, I've talked to you so much about. They certainly help with the repatriation of the chemical warfare agents from Syria. CAPS, our counterproliferation analysis and planning system, is support we have been giving to the warfighter for over 25 years. Intelligence needs right through there. And then there's the render safe. If we were to interdict something, a nuclear device, we have men and women here who train every day to be able to, who can go respond, help diffuse the threat. And we haven't stopped working on the COVID threat, even as the virus morphs and continues to present new challenges. So, all in a nutshell, next slide, please. You heard Sally talk about it. We are S&T on a mission. So that is our lab ethos. We are an applied science laboratory, and it matters to us that the work we do change the world outside our 1 square mile. So, thank you, Teresa. That's my presentation, and I'd be very happy to have a nice dialogue with all of you for the rest of the time we have together.
Thank you so much, Huban, for that really informative and fascinating talk. So much ground that you covered and that you work on every day. It's really incredible. I have lots of questions, and I'd like to invite the audience to continue to submit questions via chat if you can. It looks like we've got one from one of the foundation fellows this summer regarding the space projects and/or NARAC. Is solar activity something that the lab is looking at?
I'm sorry, say that again. Sally, it broke up a little bit on my end.
Oh, sorry. The question was whether the lab, Livermore Lab, is working on anything in solar activity as a potential threat among the things you mentioned with NARAC and the space projects.
Yeah, so we certainly do monitor or support based on the science, but it is not as it's a small effort. It's not a very large effort, but yes, when they need science support, they do come to us for helping round out the understanding of what that activity could be, the impacts it would have on our energy systems. And we also, in analyzing the threats to our energy systems, to our grids, to all of that, we do look at the sources of all the threats, and this would be one of them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So sort of related, you talked a lot about collaborations with other partners, other labs, and wondered if you could expand a little bit on that in terms of, I know Livermore in particular has expressed an interest in strengthening public-private partnerships and how those collaborations lend themselves to the work that you're doing in global security and how they advance your work.
You bet. Thank you, Sai. That's really important. We are only 8,000 on this 1 square mile. We cannot solve everything. We cannot, you saw the waterfront of challenges facing our nation. We can't be everything to everybody. It is important, however, that we partner to bring our special contributions on the wider missions. So when it's cyber, we partner with Sandia, for example, to look at cybersecurity, other partners across the NNSA enterprise. We also partner with industry. We are look, you know, when some industry partners don't wish for the government to have all their secret data or their secret capabilities, but they will trust an FFRDC. So we can be that wonderful bridge, right? The go-between. We partner with them to help them appreciate and understand the threat. We partner with the federal agencies to bring them to the partnership as well. We're doing a lot of work locally, where we're going to be helping Livermore with clean energy technologies. We're doing a lot of work with the state on helping. Well, we wrote a very interesting report, Getting to Neutral. How would using technologies of today, the state of California, bring come to a point where we have, we're carbon neutral? Well, country picked up on it. DOE picked up on it. Now we've been asked to write a report for the nation. And what's really neat about this, Sally, is no miracles are required. We're talking about technologies that exist today, capabilities that we can use now. So yeah, partnerships abound on that side. In the biospace, we've had a long enduring partnership, our ATOM partnership through our Livermore Valley Open Campus efforts as well. We bring in pharmaceutical agencies, universities like UC Davis, all come together to solve these very, very difficult and complicated problems, each bringing their own special element of the puzzle, right? Capabilities, tools. We have tremendous computers here. We have incredible technical expertise here. But UC Davis has certain capabilities. UC San Francisco has certain capabilities. It also helps us with our pipeline, right? Bringing people in that way. But leveraging our open campus is so important. It's a great partnership we have with Sandia across the aisle, and we bring in industry, our advanced manufacturing capabilities that come out of there are, again, partnerships with industry and other laboratories. Yeah, it's actually a really fun way to address challenges, because you get open and exposed to so many new capabilities, thoughts, ideas, diversity of thought. If more of the same will not resolve our issues, and partnerships play a very key role in bringing transformative ideas to play.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have a couple more questions that are maybe from our Foundation Fellow students, and I want to make sure we have time for the special Q&A with just them at the end. So I'll close for the full audience with maybe one last question for you, Huban, is what keeps you up at night? What specific threats? There's so much that you presented today. And what are you thinking about sort of in the future?
So if you will allow me a moment of jest, I wish I was General Mattis, because then I would respond to that. I keep others awake at night, right? I would love so much to be able to say that. And this might come as a surprise to you, considering what all that you've heard me talk about today. But the thing that really, really, really worries me, as somebody who works at a preeminent laboratory place where great big science ideas come to bear, multidisciplinary science happens, innovation happens. It used to be that in our country, science had a great regard, right? People regarded science, took it for what it was, appreciated and understood that we don't always have all the answers, but there are data and there are opinions, and we speak to data, we speak to science, we speak to knowledge, and we based our decisions on facts. Well, how do you do national security in a fact-challenged world? Mm-hmm. How do we get the support of our nation, of our fellow citizens, for science, for investing in science, for keeping that capability, that strategic resource of brilliant scientists and engineers, critical of infrastructure like the NIF, of our high performance computing precedents in the world? How do we manage all that if we can't even agree on the truth? We can't even agree on certain facts, right? And so that's what worries me. What is our role as a national laboratory? What is our role in shaping the national dialogue? How do we regain that foothold, that respect that the nation always had for facts and science? Because all these great capabilities, all the tremendous work we do here, we have to be able to transition it into the real world, and that requires funding, that requires support, and that requires money. And as nation states are catching up with us on capabilities like the NIF, on exascale computing, right? How are we going to maintain that lead? How are we going to be setting the pace for the world if we can't convince the American public to lean on their representatives to invest in that future? And what is it going to take to fire up that next generation to bring more STEM into our pipeline? Because there will never be enough to satisfy me. So
Right.
those are the things I think about.
Thank you very much for such a thoughtful answer. And exactly to that point, that's why we really need this next generation of our scientists and engineers to join you and others at the lab in all of this important work. So thank you again for spending the hour with us. I'm going to dismiss the full audience for now, if that's okay. So we have a few minutes for the Livermore Lab Foundation fellows and students to stay on the Zoom for some Q&A time with Dr. Gowadia. Thank you all for joining us today for the final installment of our speaker series. We will send out word via email when the recordings are available on our YouTube channel. And to everyone, have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.